Winston Churchill in 22 minutes. Born on November 30, 1874, in the noble setting of Blenheim Palace, Oxfordshire, Winston Churchill's life story is one of strength, resilience and determination. Son of the influential Parliament member Randolph Churchill and the American-born Jenny Churchill, Winston's early years were marked by familial financial struggles. In 1876, the Churchill family relocated to Ireland when Winston's grandfather was appointed viceroy, only for his parents' distant relationship to spur rumours about the paternity of his brother Jack, born 3 years later. Growing up amidst the distant English aristocracy, Winston was primarily raised by his beloved nanny Woomany. Education for young Winston began at Stearge's boarding school in Ascot, where he gained notoriety as a difficult student. Despite health issues and an academically challenging start, Winston managed to improve his performance at the Brunswick School near Hove. This period coincided with his father's high-profile political career, including a brief stint as Chancellor of the Exchequer in 1886. However, Randolph's bold views and attempts to slash public spending, especially on military, led to his resignation after only 4 months in office. His political gamble proved unsuccessful, and his career in politics ended, leaving Winston to navigate his path. Winston embarked on his military journey at Harrow and, after a couple of unsuccessful attempts, finally gained entry into the Royal Military College in Sandhurst. However, this victory was overshadowed by the death of his father from syphilis in 1895, a fact kept hidden from Winston for some time. His military career took him from Cuba to India, participating in major conflicts, including the Cuban War of Independence and combat against the Momans rebels. His experiences became fodder for his writings, earning him notoriety and a place on Herbert Kitchener's expedition to the Sudan. In Sudan, Winston witnessed the campaign against Abdullah bin Muhammad, successor to Muhammad Ahmed. The Mahdi had spearheaded an Islamic uprising in Sudan in 1881, achieving early success against British-led forces. The British Liberal government had initially underestimated the Mahdi, leading to the death of the national hero, Major General Charles Gordon, in the siege of Khartoum in 1885. With the Mahdi's death and the ascent of Abdullah bin Muhammad, the British aimed to reclaim the region. The Battle of Omdurman marked the defeat of Muhammad's forces, with Winston Churchill personally partaking in the charge. He documented his observations and criticisms of the campaign in his account, The River War. Churchill's writing prowess grew over his lifetime, penning over 24 books, often multi-volume works. His adventures continued into South Africa during the Boer War, which saw him captured and then escape from a prisoner of war camp near Pretoria. His dramatic escape back to British lines, aided by locals and a clandestine freight train journey, caught the public's attention, serving as a significant propaganda victory for Britain. Winston Churchill's early life was thus marked by his unyielding spirit and audacity, characteristics that would serve him well in the years to come. Winston Churchill, fresh off the triumph of aiding in the relief of the besieged town of Ladysmith during the Boer War, returned to England, not as a soldier but with a political career in mind. In 1900, he became a Member of Parliament for Oldham, Greater Manchester, with a narrow victory. This win was quickly followed by a speaking tour across Britain and the United States, recounting his Boer War experiences. Despite being a conservative, Churchill developed a reputation for challenging his own party, particularly Prime Minister Arthur Balfour's policies on free trade restrictions. This defiant stance led him to form closer ties with the opposing Liberals, culminating in a dramatic shift to the Liberal Party in 1904. The move cost him his Oldham seat, but fortune favoured him when the Liberals rose to power in 1906, securing him a new place as a Member of Parliament for Manchester North West. Churchill's roles within the party were diverse, from Under-Secretary of State for the Commonwealth Office to the President of the Board of Trade. His progressive reforms included the instigation of labour exchanges, unemployment insurance, and the Old Age Pensions Act of 1908. Politically, he was a complex figure oscillating between socialist, liberal, and conservative views, which explained his shifting party allegiances. In 1908, he found a life partner in Clementine Hosier, a woman who stood by his side, supporting his political endeavours and helping him manage his recurring bouts of depression, referred to as his black dog. Controversy marked Churchill's term as Home Secretary in 1910, where he handled issues like the Cambrian colliery dispute and the infamous Sydney Street siege. In 1911, he took on the significant role of First Lord of the Admiralty, overseeing the Royal Navy during a period of mounting naval threats primarily from Germany. His tenure saw the construction of several state-of-the-art battleships, such as the Queen Elizabeth class. With the outbreak of the First World War and the ensuing stalemate of trench warfare, Churchill strategized to knock out Germany's ally Turkey by seizing control of the strategic Dardanelles. The joint British and French naval task force aimed to capture the area controlling the access from the Mediterranean Sea to the Turkish capital and the Black Sea. Regrettably, the campaign ended in a disaster, with tenacious Turkish resistance leading to a 10-month-long battle of attrition and the withdrawal of Allied forces, leaving some 300,000 soldiers dead or wounded. This was a sobering chapter in Churchill's political career, underscoring the human cost of war and strategic miscalculations blamed for the staggering loss of life in the failed Gallipoli campaign. Winston Churchill experienced a significant demotion. Rather than accepting defeat, Churchill proved his mettle by volunteering to serve on the Western Front during the First World War. Promoted to Lieutenant Colonel with the Royal Scots Fusiliers, he earned respect from his troops, despite lingering doubts about his motivations from individuals like Prime Minister Lloyd George. Returning to Parliament in 1916, Churchill held essential positions such as Minister for Munitions and Secretary of State for War and Air. Interestingly, his instrumental role in developing the tank broke the stalemate on the Western Front, aiding in the eventual victory. Despite a failed attempt to intervene in the Russian Civil War, Churchill continued his political journey. He played a significant part in the Anglo-Irish Treaty as Secretary of State for the Colonies in 1921, marking the beginning of the British Empire's gradual disintegration by making Southern Ireland independent. Post losing his Dundee seat in the 1922 election, Churchill slowly drifted back towards the Conservative Party. After winning the constituency of Epping, Prime Minister Stanley Baldwin appointed him as Chancellor of the Exchequer in 2004, prompting his official return to the Conservatives. However, his tenure was marked by controversy, particularly his decision to revert Britain to the gold standard. This move, which he later admitted was a mistake, tied the country's economy to its gold supply, resulting in a restricted cash flow that hampered Britain's response to the ensuing Great Depression. The period that followed was not kind to Churchill, as he fell out of favour within his party and the public, seen as a warmonger and turncoat. His decision to rejoin the gold standard was also viewed as causing mass poverty. A long period of political obscurity followed, known as his wilderness years, where he retreated from politics to focus on writing and painting. During this time, he authored a 3-volume biography of his ancestor, John Churchill, the 1st Duke of Marlborough. His detailed understanding of history, some argue, allowed him to draw parallels between Louis XIV of France and the then Chancellor of Germany, Adolf Hitler. Alarmed by Hitler's rapid rearmament of Germany, Churchill warned of the growing Nazi threat in speeches and articles, foreshadowing the imminent danger looming over Europe. Winston Churchill's speeches and columns during the late 1930s were imbued with a sense of urgency, largely due to the intelligence he received from Ralph Wigram and other contacts regarding Germany's rapid rearmament. While initially ignored by the British public and government, Churchill's warnings became increasingly hard to dismiss as evidence of Hitler's expansionist intentions mounted. By the time the Second World War erupted in September 1939, Churchill had reclaimed his place in the forefront of British politics, appointed once again as First Lord of the Admiralty. However, Churchill's early military strategy was not without controversy. His plan to obstruct German iron ore shipments by raiding the Norwegian port of Narvik in April 1940 failed when Hitler invaded the country. Despite the echoes of the Gallipoli disaster, it was Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain who was forced to step down. Churchill and Lord Halifax were the top candidates to succeed him, with Halifax unwilling to take on the role. Chamberlain recommended Churchill to King George V, and on the evening of May 10, 1940, Churchill became the Prime Minister of Great Britain. His tenure began amid one of the most perilous crises since the First World War. The same day he took office, Germany invaded Holland, Belgium, and France, setting off a cascade of events that would lead to the fall of Western Europe. Churchill responded to the urgent situation by trying to keep France in the fight, but when the French army collapsed, he pivoted to ensure the safety of the British Expeditionary Force. With the assistance of the Royal Navy and civilian craft, over 300,000 Allied troops were evacuated from Dunkirk. This momentous rescue operation ensured that Britain retained a fighting force capable of resisting any potential German invasion, and later counteracting German and Italian advances into North Africa. Churchill's next challenge was to quell voices within his own government, particularly Lord Halifax, advocating for peace negotiations with Hitler. Once he succeeded in stifling these dissenting opinions, he undertook the Herculean task of restructuring Britain's defences in anticipation of the inevitable German onslaught, following the fall of France to Hitler. Its northern region was seized while the south, governed by Philippe Pétain and known as Vichy France, maintained some semblance of independence. Despite this dismemberment, France still possessed a powerful war fleet based in the North African colony of Algeria. Recognizing the risk of this fleet falling into German control, Churchill took decisive action. He dispatched a naval task force into the Mediterranean to neutralize the threat. Arriving off the Algerian coast on July 3, 1940, the British fleet demanded the surrender of the French battleships. Met with refusal, the British were left with no choice but to engage their erstwhile allies in combat, resulting in the sinking and damaging of several French ships and the loss of 1,300 sailors' lives. Despite the perception of betrayal in France, Churchill deemed this action necessary to ensure Britain's naval supremacy in the Mediterranean. In July 1940, Hitler initiated his plan to invade Britain, launching extensive air attacks on ground targets and radar installations across southern England. These were designed to debilitate the country's air defences and set the stage for an amphibious assault. However, Britain was well prepared to confront the German Luftwaffe, having established the world's first air defense network, now known as the Dowding system, named after Hugh Dowding, the head of RAF Fighter Command. The Dowding system involved radar stations along the southern English coast, connected via landlines to Fighter Command headquarters in northwest London, together with the Royal Observer Corps. This system provided a real-time strategic overview of incoming enemy air activity, enabling the efficient dispatch of intercepting fighters. The Hawker Hurricane and Supermarine Spitfire were instrumental during this time. But the true saviour of the Battle of Britain was the Dowding system. Without it, the RAF's defence of Britain's skies would have been left to chance patrols. Throughout the ensuing months, the RAF and the Luftwaffe clashed in the skies over Britain, leading to heavy casualties on both sides. By the end of the summer, the RAF was teetering on the brink of defeat. However, a change in the course of events occurred on August 25, 1940, when ERAF bombers, hindered by dense cloud cover, dropped their payloads on residential areas of Berlin. This act incited Hitler to retaliate with bombing raids on London, initiating a period known as the Blitz. Hitler's shift in strategy inadvertently gave Britain a respite from imminent invasion as the Luftwaffe focused on bombing London rather than decimating the RAF. Consequently, the RAF was able to regroup and rebuild its pilot and aircraft numbers throughout the Battle of Britain and the London Blitz. Churchill played a vital role in galvanizing the public, delivering some of history's most memorable speeches. His words made the British people comprehend the severity of the threat they faced and fortified their determination to resist. Churchill's rallying of the nation was crucial during this dark time as Britain stood alone against Nazi Germany and faced the expanding military threat from Imperial Japan. Adding to these pressures, Benito Mussolini, the Italian fascist dictator, perceived Britain as too weakened to offer resistance and ordered the invasion of British-controlled Egypt from Italian Libya in September 1940. In response, Britain quickly pushed back the invasion, driving the Italians towards Tunisia. This development alarmed Hitler, who, fearful of a British victory strengthening their control of the Mediterranean, dispatched General Erwin Rommel and the Afrika Korps to intervene, faced with global threats. One of Britain's few remaining options was to seek aid from the United States. Churchill, with his American ancestry through his mother, had fostered strong relationships within the United States, particularly with President Franklin Roosevelt. Sharing a mutual interest in naval affairs, they had been exchanging correspondence and gifts for years, with Churchill even gifting Roosevelt a signed copy of his Duke of Marlborough biography in the 1930s. Churchill's ties to the United States, particularly with President Franklin D. Roosevelt, were vital in securing victory over the Axis powers. His ability to rally the necessary support despite strong anti-British sentiments within the United States, particularly among Irish Americans, culminated in the Lend-Lease Agreement. This essential aid program allowed the United States to supply Britain, Free France, China, and eventually the Soviet Union with vital resources in exchange for payment and global naval base access. During the intense conflict in North Africa, marked by a disheartening point with the German capture of Tobruk in 1942, Churchill authorized the creation of the world's first Special Forces units, the Commandos and the Special Air Service. Their daring operations significantly disrupted enemy lines, contributing to the war effort. Meanwhile, the German U-boat fleet posed a significant threat, one that Churchill prioritized. The tireless efforts of code breakers at Bletchley Park, including Alan Turing, and an influx of American supplies helped shift the Atlantic conflict in Britain's favor. As Churchill navigated through perilous journeys between North Africa, the United States, and Britain, the strain on his health intensified. Yet, the December 7, 1941, attack by Imperial Japan on Pearl Harbor, followed by Hitler's declaration of war on the United States, marked a turning point in the conflict from a British perspective. The declaration of war by Germany against the United States effectively sealed the fate of the Axis powers, as they could not compete with the combined resources and production capabilities of the United States, Britain, and Russia. The subsequent years saw the gradual retreat and defeat of the Axis powers. However, Churchill's leadership was not without controversy. Critics highlight his inadequate response to the Bengal famine of 1943, which resulted from a combination of Japanese occupation in Burma, poor local governance, a scorched earth policy fearing a Japanese invasion, and natural disasters. Defenders argue that Churchill and his cabinet tried to alleviate the crisis by diverting significant grain resources to India once the scale of the famine became apparent. As the war progressed, Churchill's relationship with his allies varied, cordial with Roosevelt but contentious with Stalin. Their numerous encounters were marked by impassioned discussions and heated debates. Despite the pressure from Stalin, Britain, without American support, was unable to launch a second front in Europe until later stages of the war. The pivotal relationship with the United States was instrumental in overcoming the Axis powers, as Britain alone could not match the might of Germany, Japan, and Italy. Despite America's initial resistance, mainly due to lingering animosities towards Britain, President Roosevelt rallied enough support to instigate the Lend-Lease system. This saw the United States supply Britain, Free France, China, and eventually the Soviet Union with critical war materials in exchange for gold, money, and global naval bases. Lend-Lease was a lifeline for the dwindling global influence of Britain, which without this support could have capitulated to the Axis powers in 1941. Churchill's diplomatic prowess was crucial in securing American support, marking it as one of his most significant achievements. By 1942, the North African battlefront was tense with the prospect of the Axis powers seizing control of the Suez Canal, an integral channel for supplies. Amidst these challenging circumstances, Churchill sanctioned the creation of the world's first Special Forces units, the Commandos and the Special Air Service. These highly trained and well-equipped volunteer units executed strategic raids across Europe and North Africa, crippling German war efforts and cementing their reputation in military history. Throughout the war, Churchill championed civilian resistance groups in mainland Europe, often supplied and directed by Britain's Special Operations Executive. The bombing of Dresden in 1945, which resulted in over 20,000 civilian deaths, stirred controversy and led to accusations of war crimes against Churchill and Arthur Harris, the head of the RAF Bomber Command. After leading Britain to victory in 1945, Churchill surprisingly lost the Prime Minister position to Clement Attlee. Despite this setback, he continued to contribute politically, advocating for the creation of an early European Union and warning about the threat of the Soviet Union. Churchill resumed his role as Prime Minister in 1951, navigating Britain's diminishing global role and its economic exhaustion. Churchill's health had always been fragile, marked by heart attacks and strokes. This ultimately resulted in his resignation as Prime Minister in 1955. After retiring, Churchill enjoyed painting and writing until his death in 1965. Churchill's memory endures as one of Britain's greatest prime ministers. His resolve and leadership were pivotal in defeating the Axis powers, despite the controversies that accompanied his tenure.